Hi. We are now at Chapter 4, and we will be looking at cells and the organelles, which are little organs inside the cell. So there are several types of cells. There's one called the prokaryote, and examples bacteria cells, and then eukaryotes, which is us, and plants. So why do we need to know cells? Cells work together to form tissues, such as your skin, epidermal, and tissues work together to become an organ, such as your stomach. And then the organs work together to become your body. So there you have it. The cells work together to make a body. And every cell does everything that is in the definition of life that we did in Chapter 1. So what are some of the jobs? They breathe. If they don't get oxygen, they can't do their jobs. They need nutrition. And by getting oxygen and nutrition, they have energy. And with this, they can build proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and nucleic acids, as we looked at in Chapter 3. And then they have to remove the waste, control the internal environment, which is called homeostasis, and respond to things in the externals, such as fear, walking, to go up a flight of stairs. All of those are external. And then cells need to create more cells. They die, they go through the cycle of life. They're born, they die, they get replaced. So there are three main jobs. Make energy, make proteins, which are hormones, enzymes. They all work together in a cell in order to survive. And then cells have to make more cells. As they get old, they need to be replaced. So here is a model animal cell. And you can see all these little things in them. Those are called the organelles. And each organelle is like an organ. Like your stomach is an organ, it does digestion. Well, you have some organelles inside the cell that do the same thing. They're just at a much smaller level, and they're in every cell. Every organelle does its own job. So cells need power. Without energy, it's like your iTunes or your iPad or any of your telephone. Without those being charged, your battery being replaced, they die, right? So it's the same thing with cells. They need the power in order to survive. So they need food, they need oxygen, and those two things make ATP. And then once they take in that stuff, they got to eliminate the end product, which is carbon dioxide. That's one of them. And it's the organelles that do this. And these are the four main organelles that are involved with making power: the cell membrane, the lysosomes, vacuoles and vesicles, and mitochondria. Now we're going to be looking at each of these, so don't get worried that you don't understand what they are right now. You will come back to these as you review this lecture. So here's information about the cell membrane. It's what separates outside the cell from inside the cell. It allows certain things in, and it doesn't allow other things in. Those are things allowed in. It also is a communication channel. It communicates from cell to cell, and there are markers on the outside of the cell, on the cell membrane, that are there to signal other cells as to what's going on. Your body has a major communication structure set up inside it. So it is a double layer of fat. It's a bilipid layer, phospholipid bilayer. Now, we looked at those in Chapter 3, so go back and review what a phospholipid is. With that, the head and the tail, one is hydrophobic and one is hydrophilic. The head actually likes water and the tails do not. So in turn, that is how they line up. Well, because the head is facing the watery environment. It faces the inside of the cell and it faces outside the cell. The tails don't like water, so they go away from it. They move away from it, and that's why they form this phospholipid bilayer. Then you have receptor molecules that receive information and send information. So there's your cell membrane. It's all outlined in red. And what we're going to be doing is adding to this picture as we go along. And I will be handing out pictures for you to fill out also. They may not look identical. I like to use different drawings because if you get used to just one, you're not going to see what other cells look like. Now the next thing is the cytoplasm. That is the material inside the cell. It's a watery-like jelly, and it helps hold the organelles in place. It is not the only thing. There is a cytoskeleton, which we will look at a little later in this. Okay, now vacuoles and vesicles were also part of what make energy. And they're sort of like little cars. They carry things, and they actually move things around the cell. And they also store things. So here you can see a small food particle going into the cell. That's what that green is. And there's a vesicle that has been formed. Now, it's like a sac. Now, a vacuole is filled with enzymes. The vesicle isn't. It has the food in it. The vacuole is filled with other chemicals, and it helps digest the material. Now, food and water storage are also part of the energy process. And the one on the right is an animal cell. And there's the food vacuole in the animal cell, as it was on the page before. And here's a bacteria, or a single-celled animal, and you can see that there are vacuoles there too. And when they say contractile, they actually have a job of helping move the species. And then plant cells also have vacuoles. And they have something called a central vacuole. It's inside the center of every plant cell, and it helps make the cell more rigid. So there are the vacuoles and the vesicles. Now the last piece of that last puzzle was the lysosomes. What are they? Their function is to digest food. Once you digest food, you make energy. It also is important to get rid of the waste product. So the lysosomes are involved with eliminating waste. So it's like a sac with digestive enzymes. See where the lysosomes come from? They attach to the food vacuole, the food particle that came in, and it digests that food particle. It also digests broken down organelles. You got to realize inside the cell you have all these organelles. They also die and need to be replaced. Some don't last very long at all, and some are there for years. So when you have an organelle that is ready to be eliminated, the lysosome is what helps break it up. Lysosomes are heavily involved with the development of our fingers and our toes. If you look at this, you can see a fetus at 6 weeks and at 15 weeks. At 6 weeks, the hand doesn't have individual fingers, nor do the toes. But if you look at by 15 weeks, they're breaking down to individual fingers. And what happens is, as the fetus is forming, the lysosomes in each of the cell help digest the tissue that's holding each of the fingers and toes together so that they become separate. If you look at the lower left, you can see that foot, the second and third toe didn't separate. And that would be due to a lysosome not doing their job. Also the hand, the third and fourth finger. And also at the top, both of those are showing the hand, the fingers that didn't separate. This is something that they can easily fix after the baby is born. But it's the job of lysosomes to break down that tissue. Now we're going to look at mitochondria. They function to make ATP. They get sugar from the nutrition, oxygen from the breathing, and the two of them combine together to create ATP. That is your charged battery. Now, if you look inside the mitochondria, it's a double membrane layered sac, and it is in both animals and plants. Now, there's another way that plants make energy. They have mitochondria, do the same thing, but they also have chloroplasts that have a green color to them. These are to function in photosynthesis. They need the sunlight in order to create the sugar. And they also take in carbon dioxide. So between the sunlight and carbon dioxide, they create the exact same thing, ATP plus sugar. Animal cell on the left, plant cell on the right. You can see the central vacuole. the mitochondrion, and the chloroplast. They're going to be outlined. There's the mitochondria. And there's a chloroplast, only in plant cells. Now, plant cells have most of the same structures that animal cells have. Cytoplasm, a cell membrane, cell wall. That is outside the cell membrane. It is rigid. It is what we eat in our diet called fiber. It is not digested by our body, and it's really important that we eat fiber. The central vacuole is also not in animal cells. Lysosome is in both. Mitochondria is in both. Chloroplast is only in plant cells. Now, this is another main function of cell, is that cells need to make worker bees, or proteins. And the way they're made is that DNA, which has genes all along it, codes for the proteins. And it's the DNA that tells the cell how to make the proteins. You need proteins. Your entire body is protein. Enzymes are proteins, and they're important for chemical reactions that are occurring in your body, such as when you digest food. You have enzymes that speed up the food digestion process. Hormones are proteins. And here are the 4 primary organelles that are involved with making proteins. And we're going to be looking at these. So proteins are the primary job of many cells. Without proteins, you don't have life. DNA is in every cell. As humans, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. The DNA is in the nucleus, and it is what tells the cell how to make the proteins, which are made up of amino acids. And the amino acids or proteins are the cell. All the organelles are proteins. The nucleus is the control center. It's in the it's not necessarily in the center of the cell, but it is what houses the DNA. It protects it. There is a nuclear membrane which has pores that encloses the nucleus. Inside the nucleus is something called the nucleolus, which makes ribosomes, which we really haven't looked at yet, but they're outside in the cell. The rest of the cell, they're outside of the nucleus. So they're made inside the nucleus and they go out into the cell. And then you have chromosomes and chromatin. The difference between them are they are the same thing, but chromatin is what chromosomes are called in the phase of cell development prior to when they go through mitosis. So there's the nucleus, the nucleolus, the chromosomes. Now the ribosomes are very, very important because they are what make proteins. they read the instructions that the DNA sends out into the cell. Now, there's two types of ribosomes. Some float in the cytoplasm, and others are attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. And that is what you're seeing in the picture below, that you've got the endoplasmic reticulum with all the little blue dots on it. That's rough ER. And there it is. It was just highlighted for you. Now, the endoplasmic reticulum is quite complicated. It's like a passageway that the proteins get manufactured inside of. And the endoplasmic reticulum works with the ribosomes to build the proteins. So you have the rough ER, which has the ribosomes dotting the endoplasmic reticulum. Then you have the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and that makes fat. That's more involved with making fat than it is with proteins, and that's why it makes the membrane, because your membrane, if you remember, is a fat. Now, the other organelle that's really important is the Golgi apparatus. And this does the completion of the protein. The information comes from the endoplasmic reticulum by a vesicle, and it goes to the Golgi apparatus for the finishing process. Sort of like UPS headquarters. It receives the vesicles that came from the endoplasmic reticulum, and it sorts and ships where the proteins need to go. So this is going to explain how proteins are made. We've talked about all the organelles and how they work, but how do they work together? So this is a very complex process that I've tried to simplify here for you. There's the nucleus, and there's your DNA. That is what controls what protein is going to be made. The DNA gets copied, and it's not a double strand, the copied piece. It's a single strand, which is called RNA. The RNA can fit outside the nuclear pores. DNA cannot. The endoplasmic reticulum is attached to the nucleus. Those little dots I just put in are the ribosomes that are along the rough ER. So these ribosomes and the RNA, which just attached itself to a ribosome, is being read. So the code or the directions or the book of directions came from the RNA. The RNA attaches itself to the ribosomes, and the ribosome has a top and a bottom piece, and it's sort of like a tape that flows through the top and the bottom, and the ribosome reads what the RNA says to make. And that is the protein that you see made there. They're individual amino acids that bond together to start to make a large protein. So it finishes through the tunnels of the endoplasmic reticulum, and now it forms that protein, the amino acids, are in that little ball that is called a vesicle. This vesicle now is going to travel inside the cell to the Golgi apparatus. It breaks down the vesicle itself, takes the protein in it, and remember, this is where the shipping and the sorting occur. It strips it, gets it to be in the final product, travels just like it did in the endoplasmic reticulum, and now it's going to be sent somewhere. And there's many different places depending on what it is. It can go outside the cell just like that, or it can go to the blood and be like a hormone, can be sent around the body. So when new cells are made, there's an important piece that was left out of this called the cytoskeleton. And you see the structure in front of you. Well, basically our cells have a structure just like that inside of every cell. It's called the cytoskeleton. And it gives support. It's sort of like we have a skeleton and we have bones. Well, these are very, very small tubules. And it helps give shape to the cell, and it allows a passageway. It's made up of protein fibers, and there's 3 different types: microfilaments, intermediate filaments, and microtubules. Each one is a different size, as you can see from the picture on the bottom. When you go through the lecture that I have online, you will see that I have some movies that show you this cytoskeleton, and I highly recommend that you listen to them because they'll really help. They're important for movement. Without the cytoskeleton, some cells aren't going to move. And a lot of cells depend on moving around the body. Cilia and flagella are 2 examples of cytoskeleton tissue that help move the cell or move things along inside the cell. The cytoskeleton is important for regulation of what goes on in the cell. And here's a little picture that sort of shows what it looks like and how it anchors all the organelles inside. And the picture on the upper right is a picture that shows that they've died, and you can see the skeletal network inside each of the cells. So cells finally also need to replace, repair, and grow. If they don't do that, life will not continue. So it is important that when they make a new cell, that the DNA is put into the new cell. They need to make more organelles so that when they split, each of the daughter cells have the correct number of organelles to do their job. So when they divide, they split everything in 2 and become daughter cells. And this is called mitosis. And it depends highly on the cytoskeleton framework in order to do this and make the DNA go to the correct parts of the cell. And you can see how it's split there. So centrioles are also part of the cytoskeleton. You have a pair of them, in animal cells, and they help cell division. And that little black dot on each end is one of those centrioles. They split apart when the cell divides. And they help pull the chromosomes to each end of the cell. And there they are. So they have three main jobs: energy, make proteins, and make more cells. This picture is from your textbook, and like I said, I like you to see different pictures of cells. And of course, anything that we've looked at is an idealized cell. Not all cells look like that, and when you're in lab, you will see many different types of cells, and they all have different functions, and depending on their function, they'll have different structures. So, that's the story.